Welcome to Resilient. My name is Mike Kearney, the Risk and Financial Advisory CMO over here at Deloitte. Today, we are bringing perspectives from our leaders in Asia, where the impact of the COVID-19 crisis has been in play for a long time, and the recovery has bloomed across many sectors. That's why this series is so important. We are hearing directly from those who are navigating the crisis and combating the challenges of a rapidly evolving environment. As leaders lean in to recover from the crisis, many are gaining insights and taking advantage of this opportunity to build greater resiliency into their organization. Love to know, what are their learnings? What might the post-pandemic future look like for resilient organizations? How can leaders drive greater coordination and guide their response to future crises? And how can they sustain their recovery and build trust with all of their stakeholders? I'm joined by two Deloitte leaders advising clients about all of this and more. Eddie Chu, the Asia Pacific lead partner for strategic and reputation risk, and Theo Niemeyer, a director in cyber and strategic risk for Deloitte Japan. Eddie and Theo will share their perspectives on where they are seeing organizational recovery and building long-term success into the next normal. So let's hear what they have to say. So I want to start with a question that I want to pose to both of you, and that is, we are extremely interested sitting here in North America, and it feels like COVID-19 is still raging. So the question I have to start off is, how is the recovery going in Asia Pac? And maybe Eddie, I'll start with you, and then Theo, you can jump on.
Thank you, Mike. I think that's the question hanging in everybody's head over the past 3-4 months. Well, everybody talks about recovery. So if we think about what recovery means, that means that, for example, like after you have been through a surgery, then always we wish the patient that speedy recovery. So that's kind of like a situation where after you have been hit hard, and then you are gradually coming back to the normal shape. I live in China. So if you look at the Chinese economy, then we had a very bad quarter, just like most other countries did. We saw the GDP fell by 6.8%, and in Q2 we saw that it rebounds. We just had the statistics out, and then the statistics says that the Chinese economy grew by 3.2% year on year in Q2. So a lot of the analysts said that, oh, that's fantastic. We have got a very good recovery in China. We've got a speedy recovery in China. Everything is now back to normal. But if you dig deeper into it, if you recall, Chinese before the pandemic, we all talked about the GDP growth by around 6% year on year. So now Q2 is 3.2%, but that cheered everybody up, because it seems like, oh, now it's back to the growth track. But if you compare 3.2 with 6, there is still a big gap there. So a lot of the statistics, like the consumer spending, like fixed asset investment, they are all actually still in the negative growth trend. So I would say that in China, we have seen that things are gradually back to normal. But within the Asia Pacific region, outside of China, I think the situation is still challenging. Most of the geography, most of the countries, we still see expecting, or we have seen a negative trend in Q2, and the outlook in Q3 probably is not fantastic. So, the sentiment is gradually coming back, because of the not the economy only, but also the lockdown measures. But people are now starting to worry a bit about the second wave of the third wave. So that's the quick response to your question.
Theo, what would you add? I know that you're based out of Japan, but you obviously practice in Asia Pac. What would you add to Eddie's comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think that what Eddie is sketching out for the Chinese economy and the impact COVID has on consumer confidence is the same here in Japan. We are heading towards a recession. and the government is initiating many initiatives to boost the consumer business, to help businesses through these difficult times. And we are all anticipating a long recovery. However, we also see some positive notes here, and companies and organizations are now adjusting to this new normal. So, for instance, remote working in Japan was pre-COVID almost non-existent, and now with COVID, we can clearly see that organizations are much more agile than they thought they were. They have the systems and the capacity in place to work remotely, and this has a huge impact on the Japanese economy. Workers are no longer obliged to make long commute hours, so their effectiveness and their involvement in different activities is boosting. So that is a positive thing, and that probably will help also recovery going forward.
You know, it's interesting. I've reflected quite a bit over, obviously, the last, I don't know, what are we into? It's 4 months. And I'm a big believer in silver linings. And yes, the whole virtual nature of what we do is difficult, but I think there's actually a lot of things that are good about it. Like I love actually engaging with people and seeing them where they live. I would say conference calls, video calls have gotten exponentially better over the last few months. And I certainly do not miss my commute, nor do I miss jumping on a plane every week. Beyond what you guys talked about, what makes you optimistic based on what you've seen in Asia Pac for the rest of the world? Like, is there something that we can cling to, especially here in the United States, that you guys have seen that gives you hope, that makes you optimistic?
The energy level, and the never say never mindset in Asians are actually encouraging, because regardless of all the negative situation, negative circumstances we've seen over the past few months, people are still upbeat. I think because the Asian economy, we have seen a lot of the possibilities down the road. So whether it's in China or whether it's in Southeast Asia, I think people are still remain upbeat. We're still being hopeful that the dawn wouldn't be too far. And so I think the energy level, the upbeat sentiment is something that is encouraging to us.
Yeah, if I might add, I think what surprised me the most is the enormous willingness to work in a collaborative way, and the increased solidarity between different organizations in the value chain, and also the ability to adjust to this situation, and to find new sourcing options, to diversify the supply chain. And also a very important thing is that now organizations are truly looking into their supply chain and trying to map the various connections and to get greater visibility to that, and to really find new options for supplies, for sourcing raw materials. And that really shows that the economy and organizations are more agile and more resilient than previously thought of.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on a couple comments. This whole notion of energy level, I think it's probably connected to the fact that we as humans like to solve problems. And I think, obviously, given this whole new work arrangement, there's a lot of problems to solve. Theo, you talked about this willingness to work in a new collaborative way. Just reflecting on a workshop that we did last week with a client, and we were able to bring in people to this meeting, to this workshop, that we never otherwise would have been able to, because it would have required us to fly them from all different parts of the world. But we were able to tap into them. And so there is this like optimism and hope, new way of working that I think actually is pretty cool. And I love some of the things that you guys talked about, especially this notion of, never say never, and this new way of collaboration. Theo, I want to pick up on a comment that you made before I took over, and that is around organizational resilience, and this whole notion of resilience. It's kind of like the catchword, it seems like, nowadays. But what is organizational resilience look like to you now that we are several months into the COVID-19 crisis? Because this is something I would say every leader is thinking about now. What does it look like to you?
Yeah, what I really think is that pre-COVID, resilience was not really on the executive agenda. And now leaders are fully aware that resilience is of key strategic importance. Resilience was often conducted within silos, and it was the responsibility of individual functions and business units. They created their own risk assessments, their business continuity plans, emergency response plans, but basically for single functions and entities. And financial resilience, organizational resilience, reputational resilience, risks, they were not considered as an integrated system. And now with COVID, it's clear that organizational resilience requires real strategic leadership and involvement and coordination to consider the business services they deliver from a value chain perspective. And they really started to understand what stakeholders are likely to feel and to do if services are disrupted, and organizations are really trying to identify the vulnerabilities and to understand the interactions and dependencies such as systems, supplies, staff, data, locations, and demand in a much more holistic way. Business services and the key processes are now much more prioritized against their relative importance regarding finance, supply chain resilience, and organization resilience, and considered how financial resources can withstand and absorb disruption. And I think that is a key remarkable thing that emerged. So that's something that strikes me.
Hey, Theo and Eddie, please chime in on this because I'm really curious to get your guys' thoughts. Do you think that kind of quote unquote resilience was not top of mind for executives before because they hadn't gone through a crisis of this nature? Was it that risk management professionals weren't elevating it to something that they should care about? Is it maybe you didn't even have the right risk professionals in the roles?
Yeah, I think in many organizations before they ever were confronted with a major crisis, risk, business continuity, crisis management was not something that was basically on top of mind of executives. Of course, due to all kinds of regulatory or self-imposed compliance requirements, organizations did have some of these components, but they were never considered an integrated system or holistically or from a strategic perspective. It was often delegated down into business functions and business units, and there was no central coordination, and crisis management was often perceived as a tick-in-the-box exercise that needed to be done, but was not really embedded and taken on as a strategic capability.
Yeah, if I may add, there is a Chinese saying that you never cry before you see the coffin. So if you look at, I haven't done the counting or statistic, but if you look at the term black swan, how many times black swans were being mentioned like 4 years ago? And if you look at the media, how many times similar terms are being mentioned now? That speaks the mind of the people, because 4 years ago, well, people will, when something really weird happened, people would think that, oh gosh, how could that ever happen? But now people now accept that the only certainty in the future is uncertainty. So that's why people now, when we talk to the clients about crisis, you got to get prepared for the next crisis. They actually pay full attention to our session. Rather than 4 years ago, when you talk about that, they say, oh yeah, I know that. So we've got a BCP, we've got that sort of things in place. So I think that's kind of like how we see the situation.
Yeah, I remember going out to a lot of clients and I talked to them about this and they'd say, listen, Mike, I get that this is important and I get that you have research that says we're going to probably have a crisis in the next 5 years, but it's not the number one thing. It's probably not even the top 5 things. So they recognized it, but it didn't feel imminent. So it's one of those things that you can kind of push down the road. Eddie, I want to stick with you on my next question, and that is, organizations obviously had some stuff in place to help them through the crisis, or they innovated or put things in place while they were going through the crisis. Can you talk about what organizations had in place or put in place? And this could be, anything from a function, a process, a system. Just maybe talk about what they did have in place.
Most of the leading organizations in the market before the pandemic, they had something in place. May it be a business continuity manual, or may it be some kind of the emergency setup that they would just activate. But then I think what we have seen, the success stories, when we have seen a lot of organizations survive through the pandemic very well, and most of them actually got into the crisis mode very quickly. We have seen a lot of the European or American multinationals, when the pandemic was very bad in China, the executives of the multinational, they started to think about it, and then they get it prepared. So when the pandemic hit, they could quickly respond to it. So I think they have got the protocol to activate it. I think that was one of the most important successful ingredients.
Hey Theo, Eddie just brought up a command center, and I think obviously we know it, and I think people probably could get their minds around it pretty quickly. But what is a command center in the context of the crisis that we're going through, and maybe even thinking ahead, when employees start to come back to work and all that good stuff? Can you talk about what a command center is?
Yeah, Mike. Many organizations think a command center is something you see in films and on television. When you see Armageddon films with enormous spaces with flat screens on the wall, with a lot of people running around distributing information, and a general standing in the middle coordinating things. I think that's a very nice and interesting picture. But I think what a command center is basically a capability. It's a capability that enables an organization to identify and to assess the information that is relevant to managing the situation they're in. So they have a centralized information gathering function and an analysis function. They have a strong leader basically coordinating the efforts of information gathering, assessment process, decision-making process, and the execution-making process to ensure that based on the facts and the assumptions and the impact the situation has on stakeholders, on assets, on people, that the decisions they made and the course of action initiated are actually driven out through the organization, and that the actions are monitored, and that based on additional information and how actions are basically generating results, additional actions and slight changes in courses of actions are initiated. So it's basically a central command, control, and communication function within an organization. And that can be a very small group of a senior executive leading that effort. It should always be a strong leader with the right authority, reporting directly into the executive management and mandated to make important decisions to respond and recover from the crisis to a very large group of people with different functions for large multinational organizations.
You talked about a strong leader. Where would they come from? Like, is a command center led by somebody that's in risk management, or does it not matter? It just needs to be somebody with the appropriate brand and gravitas within an organization that can really make things happen. Theo, what do you think about who's the right leader?
I think in crisis, I think the background of people is not so important, whether or not they are a risk professional or a business professional. I think the key importance is that they have the authority and the capability to lead an organization. And what is important is that these people are directly reporting into the executive management and have the trust of the executive management as well as trust of the wider organization. So trust, authority, the ability to remain calm, to make decisions quickly. These are core characteristics of a command center leader.
Hey, Eddie, one thing that Theo mentioned I'd love to get your input on is the importance of data, and I'd even say intelligence. And this is actually one of the things that I've seen my clients struggle with, especially in the early days of the pandemic. What guidance do you have to a leader that's running one of these command centers to find the right data and intelligence, which I know you could take this question many different places, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a $1 million question, I would say. Most of the organizations they have got, well, nowadays they said they have got more than enough data for the management decision purpose. But the truth is that most of those data are geared towards the normal day-to-day operation. But taking the pandemic as the example, I think one of the key data that any organization will need to know is that whereabout of the employees, and also whether they are in healthy condition, whether they have got any risk that they got closely in connection with some patients of the COVID-19. So in a lot of the organization in Asia, we've seen that after the pandemic happened, the first thing that they have done from the data perspective is try to put in place some very simple track and trace app to ask the employee to do the self-declaration, where have you been, whether you have been to some high-risk areas, are you in good health? Are your families that you're in close contact, are they in good health? Well, in Asia, I think the controversy around privacy is less severe as compared to some of the Western world countries. But still, I think a lot of organizations, they have to understand that when they ask their employees to come back to the premises, they need to make sure that those employees coming back, they're in good health. Otherwise, that could just in fact affect their whole workforce. So before the pandemic, actually, that kind of data did not exist. So that's why the command center, when Theo talked about command center, we need to have the right people. We need to have the right empowerment by the executive leadership. On the other hand, the command center also needs to have the right data. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Theo, I want to pivot to you, and I guess one of the things that's rolling around in my mind is, in the moment of the crisis, I could see a command center thriving, but kind of as time goes on, I'm just curious: is it difficult to kind of sustain what you've put in place? And if you were the leader of a command center, what are some of the things that you can really do to sustain the command center, and what are some of the elements that you would focus on?
Yeah, well, what I've seen is that supporting clients in many different types of crisis situations in the past is that when a crisis strikes an organization, when an organization is impacted by a catastrophic disruption, a crisis team or a command center is easily set up, and based on the experience of the people in that team, in that command center, they are able to respond and to recover. But a truly intelligent organization realizes that these kind of disruptions will come more often in the future than they previously thought. So many organizations go through the rapid change of the global economy, of the marketplace, of client demand. Other market practitioners, they go through rapid change more often than they did in the past. They have large implementations of new systems, and organizations who really understand and who really conduct a post-crisis analysis understand that the capabilities developed during managing the crisis are really useful capabilities to also apply when the organization goes through change. So in organizations that I've seen, the command center is basically never shut down. It always remains in some sort of a sleep modus. And the moment the organization is faced with changes or events of strategic importance, the command center is again staffed with the right support people, but also but also they then are able to pick up where they left after resolving the previous change or strategic change. So that's really an important change that we see, is that more and more organizations keep this capability in place and alive to also manage change. So besides the resilience by design that we see, so that organizations really try to anticipate known risks and to have controls in place to manage that, and to have an effective control framework that is really across the value chain, they also have this capability in place to manage that. And I think that is a big plus of organizations that go through a deep crisis and come out of it.
So it sounds like
in the way, yeah.
Yeah, Theo and Eddie, it sounds like what you guys are saying is, obviously COVID-19 and the stay-home orders almost necessitated the command center. But I think what you're saying is the world is changing, and it's changing fast, and all of the uncertainties that are out there are going to continue. And now that you stood up this command center, in many respects, trial by fire, you kind of got the executives and the folks that staff it really equipped to deal with novel crises like this. And I think what you're saying, and just put it in my own words, is like, have one always at the ready. Because around their corner could be some brand damaging event, it could be a cyber breach, it could be something negative from a competitor action. I mean, who knows? But things are kind of flying at our clients left and right. And to have that organizational capability that can be there at the ready to respond as appropriate is kind of what you guys are getting at. Am I doing good at summarizing some of the things that I heard?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, good. I'm passing. This is good. So I want to connect two concepts. We've talked a lot about this command center, and Eddie, I'm going to direct this at you. We've also talked about resilience. Is this kind of the next stage of resilience, and it's kind of almost like this command center creates a resilience hub? Is that maybe a good way to look at it, Eddie?
Yeah, I think so. Nowadays, everybody talks about resilience. Before the pandemic, resilience is kind of like a term that people didn't really understand what we're talking about. So resilience means that if I try to put it in simple language, resilience is the capability for you to recover. So I think it depends on the journey where the organization is in the resilience journey. So if the organization is already really close to the end of the journey, i.e., they can just go back to the normal operation, normal business as usual. I think command center, we may just put it as just like what Theo mentioned about get it ready to get prepared for the next crisis. But I think just like what I mentioned at the beginning, that the whole world, I think we're still early in the stage in the journey of the recovery. So even though in China we've seen economics come back to the growth trajectory again in Q2, but still a long way to go before we can get back to normal. So I think command center would be important to position as the resilience hub to direct and to supervise the resilience activities of the organizations.
One of the key activities that we're talking a lot about in the United States, and I think you are a couple months ahead of us, and that is people returning to work, which is a very challenging topic. I know that there's delays for many organizations. A lot of organizations in the United States have said, you never need to come back to your physical location of work. But can you talk about how a command center can help leaders navigate their people's return to the workforce or workplace, excuse me, and Theo, I'll direct this at you, and Eddie, if you want to chime in, you certainly can.
Yeah, I think going back to the workplace is something new for all of us, basically. Of course, individual organizations in the past did have some key interruptions or disasters that require to relocate, but the whole COVID context was there missing. So this is all new. So a command center is I think the right organization and capability to ensure that all the relevant elements that are of key importance and impacting and the return to work are considered. So a command center is already in a good position to understand where key vulnerabilities are, where key interactions and dependencies are from a workspace perspective, from a health perspective. The regulatory environment, certain governments do issue certain regulations or guidance that needs to take into account. They also need to understand what kind of workers should go back first because of the business processes. So a command center is in the right position to manage the HR aspect, the facility aspect, the safety aspects, security aspects as well from a cyber perspective. So all these things are done perfectly well by a command center, and you really need some central coordination and also communication about return to the workspace, because many people are still uncertain about what the future will bring. So communication to specific worker groups, who should go first, what the requirements are, and also to build in clear escalation thresholds when the situation traverses, and when a new peak emerges, what to do next. So I think that is work for the command center, and no other function within the organization is capable of taking into account all these different angles and viewpoints.
Communication is one of the key ingredients when organizations deal with the crisis like this. And it's particularly important when the command center is there to help people, guiding people to come back to work. Because most of the countries, the workforces have been working from home for 3 months or more. So now they're now gradually, on one hand, they are quite keen to come back to the office premises to work together in person with their co-workers. But on the other hand, there are anxiety there. So I would say the command center, if played well, it could be the source of confidence for people. Because
I like that.
Things like in the times like this, just like the wartime, people are craving for leadership. So the command center in proper communication that would give confidence, and also that would comfort the minds of a lot of people to help them to get back to work in a proper manner.
Hey, Eddie, I'm going to stick with you. And the benefit of having both you and Theo on this interview is the fact that I would argue that your countries may be a few months ahead of ours, maybe a month, I don't know. I would love to understand from you, and Theo, please jump on, because I think this is a really important question. And that is, what should leaders be focusing on as they really begin to recover? And not a laundry list, but what are a few of the most important tasks that leaders should be focusing on as they plan and execute their recovery?
I think the first point would be everything should start from the heart. We talk a lot about the heart of the resilient leadership, designed from the heart. That means that everything that the leadership is doing to steer the organization through the pandemic, all those tasks, we talk a lot about the tasks, we talk a lot about the actions, but all those actions should come from the heart of the leadership. The leadership should have a heart for their people. So I think that's actually very important, because if you don't have that heart, your people will feel that. Your people will know that what you have got in your mind. So I think that's the first element. The second
Eddie, can I just interject before you go on? Because I think you're bringing up a really important point, and I want you to maybe expand on it just a bit. When you're saying they should start from the heart, you're really getting at, and I'd love to get your thoughts, but like deep empathy of your employees, putting yourself in their shoes, understanding the challenges that they have. Is that where when you say heart, is that what you mean? Yeah,
exactly. For multinationals now they have got a global footprint, but we have got a vast diversity of the physical environment of our employees around the globe. Just give you one example. We are always on video calls nowadays, And then different people, well, people from different countries, they've got the different tendency about switching on the camera or not. We don't force them to switch on the camera because their living condition may be different. So we want to make sure that everybody has got the comfort level to do whatever they want. They have got the freedom. They have got the room to ensure their work is properly done. So that's the kind of like the heart that our leaders need to have.
Well, don't you think, Eddie, this is just me giving my perspective on this, but don't you think that the more that leaders lead from their heart, that their employees will not forget that? I mean, this truly is, in some respects, from a internal brand perspective, a moment that matters for organizations. Because if you truly do lead from the heart, show empathy, your employees won't forget that. Likewise, if you don't, that's not a great way to develop, commitment from employees.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The other point I want to share is embrace the long view. Because, even though after the response phase, organizations tend to take a short-term view in quickly getting the business back to normal. But I think the sad reality is that it takes some time. It's not a 2 weeks journey. It could be a journey crossing several months at least before any organization can get back to the BAU. So embrace the long view is the advice that normally we would give to our clients.
Absolutely. Hey, Theo, a lot of what we've been talking about so far today has been really managing in the respond and the recovery phases. But there's a lot of conversation about what organizations can do to prepare for long-term success, and actually had a great conversation with a leader at Deloitte last week and a futurist about balancing these two objectives. What are some of the things that you think organizations, leaders can do today, kind of super pragmatic things that they could do to prepare for the longer term?
What I think is key, to really understand the key elements of what the future of resilience looks like for an organization, so that they really take into an integrated way to see financial resilience, operational resilience, and that is the non-financial resources that an organization has to withstand and absorb impacts. Together with reputational resilience, these three key elements are of key importance for an organization going forward to again deal with these COVID-19 kind of disruptions and crisis situations. So, but in order to really understand that, strategic leadership should come together and to ensure that all critical functions of an organization come together and to really try to identify what potential key risks the organization will face, what are key vulnerabilities, what are key dependencies, et cetera, and based on that, they really should come up with a long-term view of how they are going to deal with these kind of situations by building resilience by design. So for these known risks, they should have plans in place. There should be controls in place to anticipate and to withstand, to respond to these kind of situations. But they should really think about, okay, what are other elements that we need to build in to diversify our supply chain, to find other sourcing options, and to make sure that we are not as lean as we were in the past. So where do we need to build up stock, and what kind of reserves do we need to have in order to weather potential future crises? And this comes at a cost. And I think that is the key importance, that organizations make this switch from the total agile mindset to a more resilient mindset, and to really understand what the potential benefits are, but also what the costs are to achieve that resilience. Resilience.
I love that. Yeah,
resilience will not come without cost.
Absolutely, and that's an incredible tee up for Eddie, a question that I have for you, and it's built around scenario planning. And I will tell you, I have a big bias towards scenario planning because I think it's one of the tools that's fairly easy to execute to engage executives on what are some potential uncertainties and scenarios in the future and what are some risks that could theoretically play out. And so what I'd love to understand from you is how are you seeing your clients use it as a tool to identify future risks? And what are they encountering as they implement it? I know from my perspective, a lot of clients are like, oh my gosh, this is something we need to do. So what are some of the challenges that your clients have experienced in implementing it? And anything else? Are there any common pitfalls? Are there leading practices that should be considered? What are your thoughts?
All right. So I would share from two angles. I think the pitfalls or the challenges of the scenario planning. Well, by the way, I'm a big fan of scenario planning. I always advise my clients that in this type of the crisis, you just have to have scenario planning. Otherwise, you're just like moving forward with your eyes being covered. So number one is that the clients need to be pragmatic. Pragmatic means that they need to tie the scenario planning to the real, actual operation management. Because from time to time, scenario planning is a sexy word nowadays, and people, clients just like it. But from time to time, we have seen organizations, they treat scenario planning exercises as a training for the executive. So the executive, they got busy, they got tied up in managing the situation. And then the leadership, really has got a good heart, pull the executive team together for a kind of like one-day workshop, scenario planning. And then at the end of the planning, that's it. From time to time, they just enjoy, or they had a good time talking a lot about different possibilities, and then that's it. So the advice that I always give to my clients is that always tie the scenario planning exercise with your actual operation management. Don't treat them separate tasks. On the other hand, the other point that I want to share is that be innovative, because to the other extreme, a lot of clients they got asked by their board to conduct some scenario planning exercise, and then they just do it, and then they talk about the mild scenarios, the normal scenarios, the harsh scenarios. In the harsh scenarios, they at the back of their mind, most of the executives would thought that, well, it's not quite possible. Well, we'll see. But then be innovative. We've seen some of the organizations, they've done really well in the pandemic. They just got so innovative. Some retailers has been having a very hard time over the past few months. When the lockdown started in some of the countries, they quickly turn it to online business model. We have seen cases where they've actually thrived in the pandemic time. People have short memories, even though I think the pandemic helped a lot to remind the executives that anything can happen. But from time to time, people would just they got a lot of the reasons. They got so busy, they got tied up in their day-to-day activities. But I think you're right. We just need to keep reminding the executives that the whole world is not the same again as compared to 4 years ago. So we need to get prepared for the next crisis.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think what is really important, as we talked before about the command center and the roles and the capabilities a command center need to have, it's one of the key things that a command center also needs to do is to basically record all these lessons learned and all these insights and all these improvement opportunities, and to ensure that these lessons are not forgotten and are implemented in business as usual as soon as possible, even during the crisis itself, to optimize certain processes or to remediate any control gaps. So that's a really important function of a command center as well.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got only 2 more questions, and I call this lightning round because that requires a quick response. Quick question, quick response. Say 15 to 20 seconds. So the first question really focuses on the core attributes of a resilient crisis leader. And it's funny because there's been a lot of commentary like, resilience is kind of a term that's in vogue now. We created this podcast 4 years ago, so maybe that means that I was before our time. But the question I have, because we created the podcast because we wanted to talk to leaders who had led through crisis, risk, and disruption. So questions I have for two of you is, what are the core attributes of a resilient crisis leader? And Eddie, I'm going to start with you, and then Theo, you can respond.
Yeah.
Well, I would still say that the heart really matters. So I would say being empathetic, I think that would be critical.
I love it. Thank you. Theo?
Yeah. So as Eddie pointed out, I think the human aspect is really important. But in addition to that, you need to have the ability to zoom in and to zoom out. So you never neglect small details, but you're also capable of keeping the strategic picture in the back of your mind, and really listen careful to specialists. They are able to provide you with a lot of information, but don't believe the first thing you hear. Listen to all the information, sum up the options available, and then make the decision and implement the decision. You should be very solution-oriented as a crisis leader.
I love it. I love both of your responses, but the one that I will take forward, because I've asked this question maybe 50 times, maybe more, and Eddie, that's yours, that like a resilient leader has to have a heart. And if there's one thing I'm going to take away from this conversation is that, because ultimately it is about serving your people, your employees, your customers, and gosh, if we always started with thinking about our people and having empathy, we'd be much better off in this world. Last question, and there has been a lot of conversation around innovation during, I don't know, we've been on about 45 or 50 minutes, but what's the one innovation that you've seen that could be a game changer in responding to a crisis in the future, and even this one? Eddie, I'll start with you.
There are a lot of different stories that we've seen. The one thing that I would pick is that I've seen one retailers, they actually, because they are in the grocery business. So in the lockdown period, actually people would just focus on spending the money on buying the necessities. So that's why they had a fairly good business. And what they have done is that they have announced that they raise the pay of their employees rather than cutting the pay for the workforce. Because we all know that looking ahead into the future, even though the grocery shops, I think they would have hard time, but the decision that they have made by the executives are to raise the pay of their employees, and that actually has created huge impact on their brand in market, and also that created big bonding, enhanced the bonding of the employees with their brand. So I think that's a very courageous move, and I think that's something that is very innovative.
I love it. Thank you, Eddie. Theo, take us home. What's one innovation that you've seen?
Yeah, one of the key innovations that I see is really the working remote and connecting people all over the world using technology, and that is not something really new. But what is really new is that this is now part of business as usual, and the positive consequences of this innovation, of really making sure that people's time is more used more effectively, is that this has a very positive impact on economy and on the climate, because this will lead to cleaner air, less traffic, and less commuting time for a lot of people. So the positives of this innovation are really here to stay, because people don't want to go back to that old lifestyle of all queuing up and traveling and so forth. So I think that is something that really sticks with me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're going through a seismic shift in how we live, how we work, how we travel. And I actually do believe that when we look back on this, we're going to look back and say there was a lot of good, maybe even more good than bad that really came out of this. I'm hopeful, which I always say when I think of resilience, I think of hope. So let's end it there. Thank you, Eddie and Theo. Thank you, Eddie and Theo. Your perspectives are unbelievably helpful as we all look to recover and rebuild. And I heard a number of insights from our interview, but one that absolutely stood out is that leaders should use this as an opportunity to build resiliency into their organizations. And I'm talking about doing it right. And if they do that, they will be better prepared for the next crisis. And as leaders rebuild, restore, and recover, using a command center can really help when that next crisis happens. We have covered a lot of topics over the last few months. And I will say, if you have any topics that you think we should be talking about or anybody that we should be speaking with, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And for those who have, thank you. It is unbelievably helpful to hear from you as we prioritize which topics we bring to you next. For more insights across all aspects of COVID-19, just go to Deloitte.com on our COVID page. You can also listen to the Resilient Podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and many more. Until next time, stay safe and remain resilient.